Charles Leclerc crossed the line in Miami and thought he'd saved 6th. Max Verstappen thought he'd held 5th. Both were wrong. Hours after the checkered flag, the FIA stewards rewrote the Miami Grand Prix. 20 seconds added to Leclerc, 5 seconds added to Verstappen. Positions shuffled, points moved around, and the drivers, the teams, the fans, all left with the same question. If the race doesn't end when the flag drops, when does it actually end? If you'd asked anyone watching the Miami International Autodrome on the 3rd of May what they'd just seen, they would have told you it was a brilliant race. Kimi Antonelli, 19 years old, winning his 3rd Grand Prix in a row from pole position. Lando Norris hunting him down lap after lap, never more than a few seconds behind the silver Mercedes. A fight at the front that felt clean and tense and almost classic. They had no idea what was already happening in the steward's room behind the pit building. Antonelli's start wasn't perfect. He locked up into turn 1, nearly hitting Leclerc and the already spinning Verstappen in the chaos of the opening corner, but he recovered. And from that point forward, he controlled the race the way only a driver with complete trust in his car can. Mercedes played the strategy perfectly, undercutting McLaren when it mattered most, and Antonelli made the gap stick. 3.264 seconds at the flag. His 3rd straight pole to win, something no driver in the entire history of Formula One has ever done from their first 3 poles. That record places him alongside names like Ayrton Senna and Michael Schumacher as the only drivers to win their first 3 poles. The difference is that Antonelli did it in back-to-back races. China, Japan, Miami. At 19, he now leads the Drivers' Championship with 100 points, 20 clear of his own teammate, George Russell. Dominance being built in real time, in front of a sport that is still trying to figure out how to respond. Norris, for his part, did everything right. He stayed within a second for most of the afternoon, waiting for one mistake from the teenager ahead that never came. McLaren's choice to pit second cost them the undercut, and Norris knew it the moment it happened. The anger on the radio was clear. He later took the result with more calm, giving credit to Antonelli and Mercedes for the better strategy. He also reported a rear issue in the closing laps that forced him to ease off, something that still hadn't been fully explained. Norris grabbed the fastest lap bonus point as a small prize. Cold comfort for a driver who felt the wind slipping through his fingers in real time. For a while, this was going to be the Miami Grand Prix story. A teenager rewriting record books under the Florida sun. A new era taking shape at Mercedes. Clean racing between 2 of the fastest cars on the planet. That didn't last. Because behind the lead battle, Charles Leclerc was having the best race of his 2026 season, until he wasn't. His start off the line was the most bold move anyone made all afternoon. From 3rd on the grid, he went around the outside of both Antonelli and Verstappen through turn 1, fully committed to the racing line and taking the lead. Clean, confident, perfectly timed. He led the opening phase of the race and stayed in the fight for a podium deep into the final stint, even as Ferrari's rear tyre overheating problems and straight-line speed gap made every lap a fight just to hold on. The 2026 Ferrari lives and dies by tyre temperature. When the window is right, the pace is there. The moment you step outside it, the car falls away. By the closing stages, Oscar Piastri had passed him on the second-to-last lap for 3rd, but Leclerc was holding 4th. A strong result from a car fighting its own weaknesses all season. This choice seemed small at the time. It wasn't. Leclerc pushed for one more try at Piastri. He needed the overtake mode out of turn 3. He knew the Ferrari's power wasn't matching the McLaren through that section. He gave it everything. And on the final lap of the Miami Grand Prix, through the high-speed run coming into turn 3, he found the edge of the car's grip. Then he went past it. The Ferrari snapped, Leclerc spun, and the rear of the car clipped the concrete wall on the outside of the turn. Front left damage, a likely puncture, likely steering arm failure on the left side. The car wouldn't turn right anymore. And Leclerc was still on the track, still moving, with the checkered flag less than a minute away and a points finish within reach. So he did what any racing driver in that spot would do. He kept going. The problem was that keeping going meant cutting corners. Turn 4, turn 8, turn 11, turn 15. 4 separate chicanes skipped because the broken Ferrari simply could not get through them. He pushed past the lapped racing bulls of Arvid Lindblad, forcing the younger driver aside. He made contact with George Russell at the turn 17 hairpin, the 2 cars brushing as Leclerc dragged his wounded car through the tight left-hander. And he crossed the line in what he believed was 6th place, a spot that still carried points, still meant something after the disaster of that final lap. If you're wondering how the stewards handled a driver cutting 4 corners in a single lap, and hitting two separate cars on the way to the flag, the answer took hours to arrive. Leclerc was called in on 3 charges: leaving the track and gaining an edge multiple times, driving in an unsafe state, and the contact with Russell. The stewards' room at the Miami International Autodrome stayed open long after the podium party ended, long after Antonelli sprayed champagne and posed for photos. And when the ruling finally came, it was a drive-through penalty, turned, because the race was already over, into 20 seconds added to his total race time. 6th became 8th, behind Lewis Hamilton. Behind Franco Colapinto, who had scored a career-best 7th. 2 more spots wiped out, more points gone. The stewards decided that while Leclerc's car clearly had some form of damage, the fact that it stopped him from cornering properly was not a good enough reason for cutting 4 chicanes on the way to the flag. In their view, the damage did not excuse the time gained. The contact with Russell was called a minor racing incident, and the unsafe car charge was dropped after no clear outside proof of a breakdown could be found. And then Leclerc changed the entire talk around this penalty with 4 words. He didn't argue, didn't blame the rules or the stewards or bad luck. Every bit of anger turned inward. The spin was his fault. The result was on him. And then, standing in front of the cameras at the Ferrari team building, he said it flat out: "That mistake is unacceptable." He confirmed the car likely had a puncture and suspension damage after hitting the wall, which explained why the steering wouldn't respond through right-handers. But none of that, in his mind, mattered. The error that caused the crash was his. The points lost were on him. The apology was aimed at his team and at the fans who had watched it fall apart in real time. A driver taking full blame for his own mistake, while the system that punished him is being questioned by everyone else. There is a reason that gap is still being talked about days later. Because what happened to Leclerc, as brutal as it was, only tells half of the Miami penalty story. Max Verstappen qualified 2nd on the grid, Red Bull's strongest Saturday of the entire 2026 season. The team had brought a heavily upgraded car to Miami, including their own version of Ferrari's rotating rear wing concept that had been the talk of the paddock. For the first time all year, the car looked truly fast. The championship felt, for one weekend at least, like it might have a 4th challenger. And then the lights went out. 3 cars wide into turn 1. Verstappen tagged Leclerc on entry, locked a front tyre, clipped the curb on the exit of turn 2, and spun a full 360 degrees. The car rotated all the way around, somehow caught grip, and kept going. The save was unreal. Broadcast voices called it genius, and they weren't wrong. The engine stayed alive, the car stayed on track, and Verstappen dropped from 2nd to 10th without retiring. He pitted under the safety car on lap 6 or 7, switching to hard compound tyres for a long run to the finish. The same bold recovery that saved his race was about to cost him, because as Verstappen's Red Bull left the pit lane, the front left tyre crossed the solid white pit exit line. A clear rule break, black and white, the kind of thing that normally gets flagged and dealt with within minutes. A camera catches it, the stewards confirm it, a 5-second penalty appears on the timing screen, and the race moves on. Not this time. The stewards watched the footage, watched it again, and then said they did not have enough video proof to make a clear call during the race. So they delayed the ruling until after the checkered flag, when new camera angles could be found and reviewed. Think about that for a moment. A pit exit line break. One of the simplest calls in the entire sport. A tyre either crosses a painted line or it doesn't. And the stewards at a venue with hundreds of cameras couldn't confirm it live. Hours after the race ended, the ruling landed. 5 seconds added to Verstappen's race time. The stewards found that the front left tyre had crossed the outer edge of the solid white pit exit line. Because Verstappen had finished more than 5 seconds ahead of Hamilton behind him, his 5th place result held. The penalty changed nothing in the results, but it changed the talk completely. Pay attention to this next detail, because it explains the real problem with everything that happened in Miami. The Miami Grand Prix produced a wild number of on-track incidents. Verstappen and Leclerc making contact at turn 1, Verstappen and Russell crashing at the final corner on the last lap, Hamilton and Colapinto tangling at turn 11, where Hamilton lost somewhere between 10 and 15 points of front-wing downforce from body damage. Liam Lawson suffering a sudden gearbox failure that sent his racing bulls into the back of Pierre Gasly's Alpine, so hard the car flipped and barrel-rolled across the gravel. Verstappen pushing Carlos Sainz wide at turn 17, Verstappen and Alexander Albon making contact in the midfield, Leclerc and Russell touching at the hairpin while Leclerc limped home with a broken car. Every single one of those incidents was either not looked at or called a minor racing incident. Not one of them carried a penalty, not a single second added, not a single spot changed. And if those were the only problems, The weekend might have survived the heat, but then came the penalties that did get handed out. Leclerc, 20 seconds, for cutting corners with a car that couldn't physically turn right. Verstappen, 5 seconds, for a tyre crossing a white line by millimetres. And the comparisons started right away. Earlier in the season, Hamilton received a lighter punishment for a similar corner cut situation in Singapore. Same type of rule break, different outcome, different weekend, different panel. One driver fighting to survive with a damaged steering arm gets the same kind of punishment as a driver whose tyre drifted over paint. Contact that could have ended careers, Gasly's car flipping through the air, Lawson's gearbox blowing apart under braking gets waved through as bad luck. And the sport wonders why the reaction after every race is no longer about who won, but about what got changed after the fact. Which, looking back, was either incredibly thorough stewarding or a complete collapse in judgment, depending entirely on which side of the timing screen you were sitting on. If you've been watching this far, you clearly care about the future of this sport. Hit subscribe. We cover Formula One every week, the stories that matter and the ones the broadcasts don't have time to unpack. So, Leclerc penalised, Verstappen penalised, multiple violent contacts across the field, not penalised. But what happened off the circuit after the race made all of that look simple. During the race itself, Carlos Sainz's anger at Verstappen boiled over on the Williams team radio. He pushed me off. He thinks he can do whatever he wants, just because he's racing in the midfield. Sainz's car had been forced wide at turn 17 by Verstappen's Red Bull, a move the stewards noted and then did nothing about. After the race, Sainz stood by every word. The move was borderline, too aggressive, though, in his view, still part of racing. But Sainz wasn't just angry about one incident on one Sunday. He has been the loudest driver on the grid this entire season about a much bigger problem in the sport. As a director of the Grand Prix Drivers Association, he has been pushing openly for permanent fixed stewards. The rotating panels that change every race need to go. So do the mixed readings of the same rules at different tracks. The argument is simple. The rules are already incredibly complex. Having the same people judge them every time would remove at least one layer of mixed signals from a system that is drowning in them. 4 races into the season, Miami is proving that argument better than any words could. Because the same stewarding panel that needed hours and fresh camera angles to confirm a pit exit line break also managed to wave off multiple on-track contacts within minutes. The panel that found no good enough reason for Leclerc cutting corners with a broken car also found no issue with Verstappen pushing Sainz completely off the track. The pattern is not about one bad call. It is becoming the defining story of the 2026. Verstappen, true to form, did not add fuel to the fire. The contact with Russell at the final corner was, in his view, nothing worth talking about. The pass on the limping Leclerc in the final meters was simply a chance he took. And on Sainz's radio outburst calling him out for aggressive driving in the midfield, Verstappen offered 6 words that summed up his entire approach. It's a bit of a jungle in the midfield. That was it. No defense, no apology, just a shrug dressed as a sentence. Meanwhile, George Russell went through one of his hardest weekends in the Mercedes. He qualified 0.4 of a second slower than Antonelli, never found a rhythm on the hard compound tyre, and spent most of the race fighting a car that refused to work with him. Late in the afternoon, after the team made setup changes that brought his car much closer to Antonelli's, his pace completely turned around. He passed both Verstappen and the limping Leclerc on the final lap to grab 4th. A recovery for sure. But the gap to his 19-year-old teammate, 3 straight wins and 20 points in 4 races, is quietly becoming one of the most awkward stories in the paddock. And here is where the Miami Grand Prix stops being about penalties and positions and starts being about the future of the sport itself. Because the FIA already reworked the stewarding process for 2026. New rules in the International Sporting Code now let stewards review their own calls on their own. The driving standards guidelines were rewritten. Penalty points were limited to dangerous, reckless, or clearly deliberate offences only. The post-race review system was expanded. Off-site stewards panels that can meet by video call were brought in. All of this was built to fix the exact kind of complaints that blew up in 2025, at Zandvoort, at Sao Paulo, at the heated season finale. And the timing of Miami's mess could not have been worse for the governing body, because all of those reforms were in place when the Miami stewards delayed a pit exit line call for hours. All of those reforms were active when Leclerc's broken car penalty landed harsher than Hamilton's lighter punishment for a similar offence last season. All of those reforms existed when Isaac Hadjar's Red Bull was thrown out of qualifying because its floor was 2 millimeters too wide, and nobody thought to check the sister car sitting in the garage next door. built from the same approach, run by the same group of engineers. Now, Verstappen's car may have been completely legal. The stewards did not flag it. Red Bull said there was no issue. But the question of picking and choosing which cars to inspect, in a weekend already full of calls for fairness, made an already hard situation worse. If one car in a two-car team is found to be running an illegal part, and the other car is not even looked at, what does that say about how careful the system really is? The reaction across the paddock and across the broadcasting world was sharp. The Verstappen pit exit penalty was widely called weak, with big voices in the motorsport media suggesting it looked more like the stewards justifying their own delayed process than holding up a real standard. That view might be harsh, but it points to a trust problem that no amount of rule rewrites can fix on its own. The FIA's 2026 reforms are well meant. Nobody argues that. But reforms that still allow a pit exit line break to go unsolved for hours, that still produce a weekend where contact between cars at high speed is forgiven, but a tyre touching a white line is punished, that still leave car checks feeling random rather than thorough, those reforms are not fixing the trust problem. They might be making it worse. Because now the sport has openly admitted the issue, spent an entire off-season rewriting the rules, and still put on a race weekend where the final results were decided in a room most fans will never see, on a timeline most fans will never accept. This is not just about Miami. It is a pattern that has been building since 2025, through Zandvoort, through Sao Paulo, through the off-season reform process, and now through the first 4 races of 2026. One team gets checked, another doesn't. One contact incident draws a penalty. The next 5 are waved through. One call happens live. The next takes 4 hours. And the drivers, the people strapping into these machines and pushing them to 300 kilometers per hour, are the ones left guessing where the line actually falls. Kimi Antonelli's 3rd straight win is a historic moment. 19 years old, 100 championship points, 20 clear of Russell, rewriting records that have stood for decades. That deserves to be the story. But the 2026 Miami Grand Prix will not be remembered for Antonelli's brilliance at the front of the field.